A bell shatters the morning stillness. One hard strike, then another, echoing across damp fields and timber roofs. Dogs erupt into barking. A baby begins to cry inside a nearby cottage. Smoke already hangs in the cold air, sharp and bitter. A bell at this hour rarely means prayer. A man jolts upright from a straw mattress. Frost clings to the inside of the shutters. His breath leaves his mouth in pale clouds while the sound continues urgent, uneven, struck by someone pulling the rope with both hands. Another bell follows from the far end of the village. In a settlement built from oak beams, thatch, and packed earth, the wrong sound at the wrong moment can mean fire racing across rooftops, cattle dying in their stalls, or sickness returning to a village that buried half its people only a generation earlier. This is the world of a 36-year-old peasant farmer in rural England. Church wardens across England still keep tallies of the dead from the pestilence that swept the kingdom between 1348 and 1351. Parish records from villages in Norfolk, Essex, and Kent show the same brutal pattern: whole households erased, fields left untilled, bells rung day after day for the newly buried. 4 decades later, during the reign of Richard II, the countryside still carries the marks of that collapse. Empty cottages sag beside the lanes. Some fields lie rough with weeds where no family returned to plough. The kingdom remains overwhelmingly rural. Most people live in villages that cluster around a parish church and a scattering of timber houses. Lords hold the land through the manorial system. Peasants farm it in strips that run like narrow ribbons through the open fields. Some villagers hold land freely and pay rent. Others still owe labor days to the manor, plowing, harvesting, repairing hedges under obligations that stretch back generations. Recent years have stirred tension inside that order. The crown demands taxes to finance wars with France. Royal officials enforce the statute of laborers, which attempts to freeze wages despite the severe shortage of workers. Villagers remember the violence of the peasants' revolt, when thousands marched on London demanding relief from taxes and labor restrictions. Even after the rebellion collapsed, its memory lingers in quiet resentment and cautious speech. Amid these pressures stands a small farming village somewhere in the English countryside, perhaps 20 or 30 households scattered along a muddy lane. Timber frames lean under thick thatch. Smoke from hearth fires drifts low across the fields. In one of these houses lives a man in his mid-30s, a married peasant farmer who works several narrow strips of land. His wife manages the hearth and garden. 3 children sleep beneath the same roof. His elderly mother moves slowly now, but still remembers the year when death carts rolled through the village. Their lives unfold inside a world where sound often carries the first warning that something has gone terribly wrong. Cold wakes him before light does. His shoulder presses against coarse linen that smells faintly of smoke and old straw. The mattress beneath him sags where years of bodies have crushed the stuffing flat. His wife breathes slowly beside him. At the foot of the bed, 2 small shapes shift under a wool blanket, their sleep broken by the chill that crept through the shutters before dawn. Across the room his mother coughs, dry and steady. The air tastes stale and bitter. Ash from last night's hearth floats in the darkness, and the room holds the lingering scent of smoke soaked deep into timber and cloth. The fire has nearly died. Only a dull red glow hides beneath gray ash. He kneels on the packed earth floor and pushes the ashes aside with a stick. The embers answer with a faint crackle. He adds a handful of kindling dry twigs gathered the evening before and breathes gently across them. Warmth touches his face as the flame returns, sharp with the resin smell of fresh wood. The cottage brightens by inches. Sparks spit softly while smoke curls toward the hole in the roof. He pulls on rough wool hose that scratch against cold skin and steps outside into the damp morning air. Wet earth presses cool against his bare feet. He relieves himself beside the garden fence, listening to a rooster call somewhere down the lane and the distant lowing of cattle. At the well bucket, he splashes his hands and face with water so cold it stings his fingers. The chill clears the heaviness of sleep from his head. Inside again, his wife slices a dark heel of barley bread hardened from yesterday's baking. She warms a small pot of pottage over the rekindled fire: oats, onion, and a few wilted greens from the garden. Steam rises with the smell of boiled grain. The children wake to the sound of the wooden spoon striking the pot. Each takes a bowl. The pottage tastes thin but filling, warm against empty stomachs. Gray light leaks slowly through the shutters. Dawn spreads across the thatch roofs outside and reveals a sky heavy with cloud. The day has begun. By mid-morning, he stands in the open field behind a wooden plow, guiding the iron share through soil that smells wet and mineral after winter rain. 2 oxen lean into the yoke ahead of him, their hooves sucking softly in the mud. Steam rises from their flanks. The leather traces groan with every step. He grips the plow's rough wooden handles until the splintered grain presses into his palms, forcing the blade deeper into the earth. The iron share bites and lifts a narrow ribbon of dark soil that rolls over with a heavy, damp sound. Each stride sinks slightly into the loosened ground. Mud thickens around his boots and pulls at every step. The work allows no distraction. A plow must follow a straight line across the strip or the field loses precious ground. He fixes his eyes on the previous furrow and corrects the line with small movements of his shoulders and wrists. Stones lie buried beneath the soil. When the share strikes one, the impact travels up the handles and jars his arms to the elbows. The oxen halt at his shouted command. He bends into the cold earth, fingers digging through grit and wet clay until he drags the stone free and tosses it aside. Only then does the plow move again. This work leaves marks on the body that never disappear. His hands have thickened into ridged calluses that feel almost numb against the wood. Sweat gathers under his wool tunic even in cool air, while his lower back aches from hours spent leaning forward to keep the blade steady. Archaeologists who study medieval village graves often find the same evidence written in bone spines worn smooth, shoulder joints ground down by decades of pushing heavy tools through resistant soil. Other villagers labor along the neighboring strips. A man across the field drives his own oxen with short calls that carry on the wind. Women and older children follow behind with iron hoes, chopping apart the heavy clods the plow leaves behind. These fields belong to the manor as much as to the farmers who work them. Several days each week he must turn the Lord's land before tending his own. The reeve walks slowly along the edge of the field, listening to the scrape of iron and the steady breathing of the oxen, while he checks that every man keeps his assigned furrow. Near midday, they pause beside a hedgerow, where the wind smells faintly of crushed grass. He sits on the ground and eats coarse bread with a wedge of hard cheese, washing it down with small beer that tastes sour and warm from the flask. The rest lasts only a few minutes before the oxen return to the harness. The plow moves again. The blade grinds through soil. Sweat stings his eyes while the field slowly turns beneath his hands. Much of the grain this land produces will leave the village in rents, tithes, and dues long before winter arrives. A bad harvest does not begin with empty shelves. It begins months earlier, with thin stalks and a sky that refuses rain. Wheat heads stay small. Barley ripens unevenly. By autumn, the yield from his narrow strips falls short of what the household needs. Yet the obligations remain fixed. The manor still claims rent in grain or labor. The parish priest still collects the tithe 1 sheaf in 10 carried to the church barn. Royal taxes arrive through traveling officials who measure what little remains. Chroniclers from the late 14th century describe villages where families sold tools, livestock, even clothing to meet those demands. When the grain bins empty before spring, hunger follows quietly. Bread grows smaller. Pottage thins until it tastes mostly of water. Illness spreads easily through a village built around shared wells, close animals, and crowded sleeping spaces. Dysentery, known in medieval records as the bloody flux, returns often in warm months. The victim weakens quickly, losing water and strength with each passing hour. Medieval medical texts recommend treatments based on humoral theory, purging the body to restore balance. A local healer may prescribe herbal infusions or bleeding with a small knife to release excess blood. Sometimes the patient recovers. Often the weakness only deepens. Grief settles into daily life because death visits so frequently. Parish registers from England's later medieval cemeteries show that many children never reached adulthood. A small grave dug behind the church becomes a familiar sight. Bells ring slowly while neighbors gather beside the pit. The service lasts only a short time. Work waits in the fields, and surviving children still need feeding. Morning compresses into a few prayers and quiet tears before the living return to their labor. Even the village itself remains fragile. Houses stand close together, their walls packed with wattle and daub, their roofs thick with dry thatch. One spark drifting from a hearth can carry flame across an entire row of cottages. Manorial records from several English counties mention sudden fires that consumed barns, grain stores, and livestock in a single afternoon. The crack of burning timber, the frantic shouts, the pounding of feet through mud, those sounds mean the loss of winter food, tools, and shelter all at once. In this world, danger rarely arrives with warning words. It arrives with a sound that everyone in the village recognizes too late. The field darkens long before the work truly ends. He lifts the plow from the final furrow and leads the oxen back along the rutted track toward the village. Each step pulls at tired muscles. His shoulders ache from hours of holding the plow steady. Dirt cakes his boots and dries stiff against the leather. Smoke rising from cottage chimneys marks the end of the working day more clearly than the sinking sun. Inside the house, the air feels warmer and thicker than the cool evening outside. His wife has kept the fire alive with a slow bed of coals. A pot hangs above it, sending up the smell of stewed beans, onions, and a little salted pork saved from autumn slaughter. She ladles the food into wooden bowls while the children crowd near the hearth. Steam touches their faces. The pork tastes rich after the thin midday meal. Bread passes from hand to hand until the crust softens in the heat of the stew. The fire draws everyone close. Flames crack softly while resin pops inside the burning wood. His mother sits nearest the warmth, rubbing stiff fingers together while she tells the children a story she remembers from her own childhood. Shadows move along the rough timber walls as the fire shifts. For a short time, the house holds a quiet comfort, warm food, tired laughter, the closeness of family pressed around the same glow of light. Before sleep, they kneel beside the bed and murmur the familiar evening prayers. The words ask for protection through the night, for mercy against sickness, for forgiveness and another dawn. Faith gives shape to fears that cannot be controlled, illness that strikes suddenly, fires that start unseen, deaths that arrive without warning. The fire burns lower. One by one, the voices fade. In the darkness, the house fills with smaller sounds, the slow breathing of sleepers, the rustle of straw beneath shifting bodies, the wind touching the thatch above. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once and falls silent. Survival in this village depends on knowledge carried in memory rather than books. Every household guards the harvest carefully once it leaves the field. Grain dries in lofts above the living space where rising smoke discourages insects and mold. Meat from a slaughtered pig does not last long unless preserved. Strips of pork hang beside the hearth, slowly smoking in the warm air. Salt rubs into thicker cuts before they rest in wooden barrels. The logic remains simple and precise. Smoke dries the flesh, salt pulls moisture away, and both slow the rot that ruins food. When the process fails, when damp weather spoils the curing or flies reach the meat, the loss can erase weeks of winter meals. Villagers also rely on practical medicine built from generations of observation. A woman gathering plants along the hedgerow recognizes yarrow by its feathery leaves and bitter scent. Crushed into a poultice, it helps slow bleeding in shallow wounds. Willow bark steeped in hot water eases aching joints and fevers. Its bitter compounds dull pain in a way modern chemistry would later recognize. Honey spread over cuts forms a barrier against dirt and infection. None of these remedies cures every illness, but they reflect careful attention to cause and effect in a world with few other tools. No family survives alone. The village operates through dense networks of mutual obligation that rarely appear in written law. After harvest, poorer families walk the fields to gather leftover grain under traditional gleaning rites. Common pastures allow several households to graze animals together. When a roof collapses or a barn burns, neighbors arrive with tools and timber because they know the same disaster may visit them next season. The farming itself carries deep craft knowledge. Men judge soil by its weight and color in the hand. Fields rotate between grain, legumes, and fallow pasture so the earth can recover strength. Children learn these rhythms long before they inherit land. Through trial, failure, and memory, the village has built a working system for enduring a difficult world. There is a detail about medieval villages that most people overlook until they hear it explained. Parish records and church manuals from 14th century England describe bell ringing as a practical warning system as much as a religious one. Bells signaled specific dangers with recognizable patterns: rapid peals for fire, slow measured tolls for death, and urgent irregular ringing to summon villagers for immediate alarm. For a farming household, understanding those patterns mattered as much as seeing smoke. One sound meant prayer, another meant drop everything, grab water, and run before the flames spread across the thatched roofs. There is also something about medieval sleep that rarely matches modern assumptions. Household manuals and court testimonies from the period describe what historians call segmented sleep. Many people slept for several hours after dusk, woke naturally in the middle of the night, and then returned to bed for a second sleep before dawn. During that waking interval, they prayed, spoke quietly with family members, or stepped outside to check animals and the weather. Darkness did not always mean unconsciousness. Night unfolded in two distinct chapters. There is a small legal detail that reveals how early responsibility arrived for village children. Manorial court rolls record fines issued to boys barely 10 years old for letting pigs wander into crops or failing to control family animals. These entries show that children participated directly in the working economy of the household. Childhood existed, but it carried obligations that modern societies rarely place on the young. There is also an uncomfortable truth visible in the soil of medieval churchyards. Archaeological excavations of 14th century cemeteries repeatedly uncover clusters of very small graves, infants and toddlers buried close beside adults. Child mortality remained so common that families encountered death again and again within a single generation. Grief existed, but daily survival left little space for prolonged mourning. And finally, there is one fact that challenges the idea that peasants lived without leverage. After the Black Death removed perhaps a third to half of England's population, surviving workers became scarce. Manorial documents from the later 14th century record peasants negotiating better wages, leaving estates that paid poorly, and quietly ignoring laws meant to keep them tied to one place. Even inside a rigid feudal structure, ordinary villagers could still push back when labor itself became power. Modern life shields most people from the dangers that once filled every ordinary sound. Clean water flows from taps without thought. Antibiotics halt infections that once killed within days. Fire brigades answer alarms within minutes. Labor laws limit the exhaustion that defined most human work for thousands of years. None of these protections stretch far into the past. They emerged only in the last few centuries, and history shows how quickly such systems can falter. The people who lived in villages like this did not think of themselves as survivors of some harsher age. They woke, worked, raised children, and buried their dead because life required it. A man like this farmer loved his family with the same urgency anyone would recognize today. He endured hunger, fear, and uncertainty not because he was extraordinary, but because ordinary people have always carried the weight of the world's survival. Which part of this life would have been hardest to accept, not the most dangerous, but the hardest to live with every single day?